Hello and welcome to Can't Find My Way Home, the podcast where expats from around the globe talk about the music and art scene in their adopted home. I'm your host, Craig. In episode 6, I spoke with two guests from Seoul, South Korea. We talked about the City of Han project. Sollee Bae is the editor of the City of Han, as well as the founder and organizer of Fiction Writers in Seoul. Joining Sollee was Ron Bandun, one of the contributing authors to the project. Ron also writes a column for the Korea Times. So, what is the City of Han? The City of Han is a collection of short stories inspired by Seoul and other cities in South Korea. As the sleeve suggests, there are three things a great city inspires: romance, music, and stories. The stories in the City of Han were written by expat writers in South Korea. We get into how the project came together, some of the locations in and around my old stomping ground in Seoul, the themes of the stories, such as social hierarchy and the pressure to fit in, as well as a look into urban exploring. Finally, we looked at whether South Korean literature can rival the success of K-pop and Korean cinema. Of course, there's also the top 5 with both a musical and literary twist. Without further ado, Sollee Bae and Ron Bandun. Joining me today are Sollee Bae and Ron Bandun. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no problem. Nothing else to do. Self-quarantine or self-isolation.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in my kitchen in Dortmund and closed my kitchen window like I have a shutter. So now it's completely blacked out and my neighbor just kind of looked out the window and wondered what I'm doing. So
Wow.
the plot thickens, you know. Who are these strange neighbors we have? It's yes, definitely strange times that we live in.
Yeah.
We're here though to talk about a City of Han, and Sollee, you're the editor of the publication.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to introduce it for us?
Oh, this is always a difficult part. Yeah, City of Han is an anthology of short stories written by expat writers, for lack of better words, who have lived in Korea, have traveled here, or are still residents here. And I had the idea for the project because I felt like it was a good opportunity to present to the world two things that have remained unheard and unseen, I guess. The first was Seoul as a literary setting, like I was talking about in the foreword. I felt like Seoul was underrepresented in world literature in general, so I wanted a book where Seoul plays a major role as a setting. And I guess what I mean by that is just that the stories don't just have Korean sounding names and words, and could really be placed anywhere in the world. I wanted the conflicts that the characters go through to be organically Korean and be possible because they were in Korea. And another voice that I wanted to represent through this anthology was that of the foreigners and immigrants in Korea. I mean, there's a growing movement across the world right now to represent diverse voices in the art scene, and I thought that was especially needed here in Korea. And because I'm someone who's constantly going back and forth between the international communities and the mainstream Korean society, I felt like there is such a huge gap between them that could be bridged. And you know, these days we have TV shows and YouTube channels that serve that cause. So why not stories written by and from the perspective of the immigrants in Korea about Korea that can be shared with the major literary scene here. So always the ultimate goal for this project has been to translate the stories into Korean and have them published by a Korean publisher, which I'm working on right now. Yeah.
And how did you actually become editor? How did the project come about?
I mean, I wouldn't really call myself an editor. I know it's kind of difficult. I don't know. I don't want to discredit myself too much, but this is actually my first time editing or putting together an anthology. So I have translated a few books from English to Korean, but yeah, this is my first time trying. So yeah.
This is the foot in the door.
And I've learned so much from the experience.
And how do you know Ron? How did your paths cross?
So,
Maybe Ron could pick this up.
oh yeah.
I just saw an ad for the anthology and had an idea, so I thought I'd submit it. I'd never met her before.
Which takes us to my next question I had was, how did the actual project come together then? Was it part of a writing group, or is there some kind of other community out with of this? And yeah, maybe you can explain that for us, Sollee.
I started this writing group called Fiction Writers in Seoul like 7 years ago, and I've been running it. And I reached a stage where I wanted to do something more. So this anthology was one of the things that I decided to try. And I didn't want to just publish stories written by the group members. I actually wanted quality stories. So I put out a call for submissions for this anthology, which Ron saw and responded. So I guess it was, and I also had another friend from the group who is a published writer, and he helped me go through the submissions and edit the works. That was how it began.
All right. Is this Brian you're referring to?
Oh yeah, you read the forward.
Of course.
I'm surprised anyone read it.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be doing it justice if I didn't. The group, how often do you meet?
We meet once every other week. Wait, so twice a month. We just had a meeting today, despite the corona outbreak. We met at a park and read the submissions and critiqued them.
Excellent. And you kept your appropriate distance from one another.
We were wearing masks, yes.
Yeah.
Here in Korea, everybody is wearing masks, so.
Yeah.
And I definitely
they're not isolating as much anymore. I drove up Haebangchon earlier today. There's this new burger restaurant that's kind of higher up from all the foreign restaurants. There was like at least 20 Korean people lined up outside it. It's going to be the next Bonnie's Pizza, I'm sure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Whereabouts in Haebangchon is it, Ron?
Do you know where Hair of the Dog is?
Yeah, I know.
Do.
50 to 100 meters uphill there.
Okay, I know MJ and Will quite well. Yeah, we lived in Haebangchon for 6-7 years, maybe longer. This was before it was a hotspot, of course.
Yeah.
It is such a cozy neighborhood.
Yeah, lots of things. So how many, if we go back to this, sorry, I'm taking a slight tangent there. If we talk about the submissions for the City of Han, if we could call it the City of Han project, how many submissions were there initially, Sollee, and what was the process of choosing the final cut, if you want to call it that? So
we had around 109 submissions or something like that. So we had Brian and I, we had a spreadsheet where we wrote down the title and we each wrote a comment about what we liked and disliked about them, whether we voted yes or no. We made sure to have the submissions blind, so just so that we don't know who wrote them. And we went through each and every one of those submissions. We wrote our comments, and I guess we just narrowed things down from there. It was actually really fun. And
were there specific things that you were looking for?
I guess one thing I was looking for was how important Seoul was as a setting. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but a lot of the submissions were just stories just that, with Korean sounding names that could really be placed anywhere, if that makes sense. Like Seoul wasn't really a factor. In all the stories that I ended up selecting, as you probably know already, Seoul is actually one of the characters that determines the fate of the others. And yeah, that was one main thing I was looking for.
I'm kind of curious also, if you don't mind me jumping in. The
Oh,
title, City of Han, I don't remember that from when we submitted. You came up with that after you selected the stories, right?
yeah, I guess. I think I realized that after reading so many submissions, that just sort of just switched the names and decided to submit them because, hey, it's an anthology. And
Yeah, I
yours is
hadn't seen that
actually
title before. It surprised me and impressed me when I saw it about a week ago.
Well, maybe this takes us to another point then. What is the title actually, for those of us who are not familiar with South Korea or Seoul or the Korean language or any Korean culture at all? What does the title actually mean, Sollee?
The title was actually really difficult to come up with, and Ron probably knows this because I actually sent out an email to the contributors asking like, what should the title of the anthology be? It was actually one of the hardest things during the process. So a city of Han, I don't know, it was just a phrase that kind of popped up, that happens like in a shower or a walk. And Han, it means Korea, but also another meaning of the word is this sort of the melancholy sadness. I guess melancholy is the right word, but that's sort of it's one of those words that's just really hard to translate, but
I
it
might
has
call
that
it
sensation
historical.
of
I might call it historically based angst, maybe.
angst. Yeah. I guess angst is a good word, although now it makes the anthology sound very sad. But yeah, it is a very culturally specific word, emotion, I guess. So it just fit. Yeah, for some reason, with the cover of the birds flying, across the mountain, it kind of fit in my head. I'm not sure if that's a good explanation, but
It was one of those moments, it just came to you in a flash of genius.
I don't know about genius, but
Oh, you can take some credit for it then. When we actually talk about Ron's story in the collection, Ron, you describe yourself as an archaeologist.
Right, yeah.
Can you explain a little bit of that for me, please?
I came up with the term. Basically, I'm what's called an urban explorer, if you're familiar with that term. I think in the UK they might prefer the term place hacker, but it's a person who visits parts of the city that are, forbidden for some reason. And I got into studying the rail lines because I was basically walking around them above ground and then underground in the Western Seoul region. And I just kind of developed an interest in the courses that train lines take you on because they're very important to the development of this city. So I came up with the term anarchaeologist as kind of a joke because obviously it combines anarchist and anarchaeologist. I am doing some light trespassing to do a lot of my research. So yeah, hopefully people can see it intended in kind of humor rather than taking myself too seriously.
And how did you get into it? What was your way into this world?
Well, when I first moved here, I felt like a weight on my soul by how ugly parts of the city were, especially to be honest, originally I lived in Suwon, where there were just high-rise complexes everywhere. And it just looking at that view just bothered me. My best friend came to visit once and even remarked on it. But one day, a friend took me to Cheonggyecheon. This is March 2005. I just wrote a column for the Korea Times about my 15-year anniversary, and Cheonggyecheon was being unearthed at the time. And next to it was an apartment complex, the Samil Apate, that was burned out from arson damage. And we actually managed to walk inside. Nobody was guarding it or anything. And I just started to realize that there's a lot of texture under this surface that Korea presents itself. And I became increasingly obsessed with trying to find it.
did you find it?
I was going to say, yeah.
See it everywhere, so I think so.
And
Yeah.
what kind of places in the city are you want to venture into, for choice of a better word? Have you?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say want. Let's say drawn to, because they're not nice places usually. The big thing that I visit a lot are abandoned neighborhoods. Like if you look around, you see an apartment complex, like 20 buildings. That's a large parcel of land, and in order to build those, they evict large neighborhoods all at once and leave the houses standing empty for, these days, about up to a year before they demolish them. And I just go to neighborhoods like that and walk around and see what it's like. And I find it kind of guides me, like what I want to write about very often.
And in relation to your story, without giving too much away, of course, about your story in the collection, what's the connection between what you've just described and the story itself?
Well, the big thing that my story is about is things that used to be in Seoul that aren't anymore, or even some things that really haven't changed all that much time over the last almost, I guess, about 20 years from the start, maybe 90 years. Sorry, not 20, 100. But like a lot of the neighborhoods, like if you look at the names very closely and you can figure some of the places out, like the main character lives in Hwangdong and then he moves to Yeonhee-dong. And one time he meets up with a character and they have lunch in Seogyo-dong, or Saikyori as he calls it because he's Japanese. And you can kind of get to see like what's been, erased and hidden from Korea, and over urban renewal over all these decades. And you can kind of see, how the character is still recognizable. So it really took me visiting places and seeing how they've changed before and after to be confident to write a story about this kind of thing. And certainly there are a lot of changes that happen to the city during this story. Like Seoul goes from being a little walled city to closer to its size today. Like it envelopes Mapogu and everything in that time.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. When you talk about super cities or mega cities or whatever the word is they're using for it these days, Seoul must have what, between 10 and 12 million inhabitants, maybe more?
It's actually just under 10 million, but that's because people are moving out to the satellite cities outside of Seoul.
Sure. So if you added in all the Bundang, or even if you went into Suwon, or if you added Incheon, or all of these places, you soon add up.
It's half the country's population.
Yeah, it's when I try to explain this to people what it's like living there and then coming back to the West, they just kind of look and they're like, how can, people will say, oh, the train was busy this morning, or the traffic in this part of Germany is actually very busy, but that's more for logistic reasons and one thing and another. But actually on the trains and so on, getting around the subway, yeah, it's like nothing compared to getting on a subway on line 1 at 7 o'clock in the morning, or line 2.
Well, when I go back to my hometown, Edmonton, Canada, which is actually slightly bigger in area than Seoul, but less than a tenth of the population, I just look around and you can't see many buildings because it's so flat, and I just think, this can't be a city. How do people live like this? Which is how I felt about Korea when I first arrived.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Like my first memories actually of the city where I arrived in February 2000 and the Incheon airport wasn't yet finished. I think it was 2-3 years later. So I arrived at the old Kimpo airport and it was a freezing cold day, but as the plane came into land, all I could see is, just as you described, Ron, was all of these high-rise buildings, and I thought, oh dear. And then, of course, when you see it from the ground up, then you realize, you're like, wow, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
Ron, what is the name of your story in the collection?
Gyeongsang Loop.
And can you give us a kind of a brief synopsis of it?
Basically, it's a story about a Japanese imperialist. Well, it's from his perspective, and he meets a Korean and watches the Korean deal with assimilation up until the end, when Japan leaves after the surrender. And it shows the landscape of Seoul in the era from about, I guess, 1929 to 1944. Gyeongsang Loop was an actual train line that ran from Seoul Station out towards Yonsei, passed by Yeonhee area, and then kind of looped back, went to Yongsan, and then up to Seoul Station again. And the story takes place like there's a little bit at least at every single one of those stations in order of that circle. That's why it's got loop in the name. Oh, well, actually, that is, I think, the original name of the train line.
How did you research the background to the loop?
I was at the time researching the train lines that were around there, like the Gyeonggi line in particular. And I happened to go to Kichagil, the area that's kind of between Hongdae and Sincheon, where they were building, it kind of intersects with the Gyeonggi line Book Street Park. Basically, it's like they put the train tracks below ground, and they turned the former path of the train tracks into a long linear park that goes through Hongdae and goes all the way to like almost to Samgakji. And so I was walking around there and I noticed they had like a plaque with all the train lines that used to go through the area. And one was this strange loop that I noticed that basically meant trains could go from Sincheon down to the Hongdae area and then double back And when I researched that, I found out about this commuter train that used to go through there. So I really wondered what kind of lifestyles the people would have when they took that train.
Fantastic. Yeah, we can read all about it when when everyone picks up a copy of the book. But I really enjoyed it. As I was saying earlier, the stories are all very from a different point of view. A couple like Ron's a little more historical context. There's some more modern ones. There's ones about these the drivers who bring you your takeout food and things like that. And there's some really nice contrast between these parts of the city that maybe a lot of people don't yet know about. So we should say the book is called The City of Han. It's coming out April 16th. If we could actually talk about some of the comparisons between, in the book, Sollee, in the foreword, we talk about these themes that kind of run through the stories. And I've made a couple of notes about social hierarchy or peer pressure or the pressure to fit in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I talk about the Seoul's architecture being the embodiment of social hierarchy, and that it's these tall rising buildings that pretty much look identical, right? And in many of the stories, we see competition and pressure to fit in and things like that impacting the characters a lot. So I think in a way I was kind of hesitant to pick those stories because I guess part of me was afraid to portray Seoul in such a negative light. But in the end, I mean, it is what it is, right? My editor friend said the title of the anthology should be Seoul, Warts and All, and I think that is how life in Seoul is like, and not necessarily a bad thing. It just is how it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, how many stories have been written about places that are nice to live? Like how many novels are set in Songdo? Nobody wants to read about Songdo.
That's very true.
Does anything actually happen in Songdo?
There's one nice bar there, Cinder Bar. It's like you walk in and it's like a small town.
I would love like a murder mystery set in a pristine neighborhood like that. I don't know. If somebody had written it, I would have picked it, I guess.
Actually, I had another. Just as we were talking before we came on air, I was thinking more about how South Korea is not known so much in the literary world as it is more now in the cinematic world. Of course, with the recent success of Parasite, and before that, the work of Park Chan-wook and Old Boy. What do you think it would take to bring the literary work up to the same recognition as the cinematic work?
That's a really difficult question.
I have a habit of asking long, difficult questions. Sorry.
Do you have an answer, Ron?
Well, I actually do think that Parasite helped. Like, to be spoiler, I haven't seen the movie. I'm just vaguely aware of its themes. But they seem like the kind of thing that has a lot of place in literature also. I'm hoping that people who go looking into Korean films start to turn their eyes also to Korean literature, which is increasingly globalizing, and there's all sorts of translations now. I think it's heading in the right direction, maybe slowly. Maybe there will be a Parasite of Korean literature, or a Gangnam style of Korean literature, if you want, even. Could be.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Like Hanjang Vegetarian might be the closest so far.
Yeah, I was going to say the Vegetarian is got a lot of recognition.
Yeah, and its translation in particular with the Man Booker Award.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I think it's getting there, and I don't think this book would have that big of an impact towards that goal, but I mean, maybe there will be many more that follow that can contribute to that cause.
And for yourself, Sollee, was there a particular? I guess you enjoyed all of the stories. It's like picking your favorite sibling or something. I don't mean it in this kind of way, but was there a particular story that you felt a bit more connected to than others?
I was worried you would ask me that question. I did love all of them. I mean, I picked those 6 out of 110 or 109 submissions, so I have a lot of love towards those stories. I liked Ron's story a lot because of the historical background. It was very unique in that way, but I guess personally speaking, I connected a lot to the first story, Omchina. I don't know if you remember, But, basically about this guy, who's applying for interview after interview because his mom wants him to work for a Samsung or Hyundai or one of those big chaebol companies. And a lot of my Korean friends who read that story told me that whoever wrote this has that Korean mother-son relationship down in that story. And I guess, yeah, I think that one I really related to on a personal level.
Ron, have you had a chance to read any of the other stories?
Nope, not at all. I don't know what any of the other stories are. By the way that she talks about them, it sounds like, is mine the only one set in the past?
Yes. The others. So I think Ron's submission stood out, especially because it was historically rooted and has such rich descriptions about that time.
There's even a little mention in the beginning of Ron's story about like Gwago Shiom. It's like the civil servant exams, the way the guy's on the train and he's dressed in this particular.
Oh
yeah, because I don't know too much about the hat, to be honest. I wanted the character to have that hat on the train, so I had to talk a little bit to justify him having it.
Yeah. Well, you see enough strange things on the trains every day on the Seoul Metro, so this would just be one of the many. What about plans for more, Sollee? You're going to wait till you finish this one first.
Yeah. It's gonna come out, and I'm gonna translate them and talk to Korean publishers. So until that's all done, I'm not really thinking about the next volume. But I'm not really sure. If there is, though, I will definitely let everybody know.
From beginning to end, what was the kind of time scale of the project?
So the call for submissions was out like 2018, the end of 2018, and I made my decisions March of 2019. And I talked to the writers. We signed the contracts. That was done around April, May, and then I worked on, and then I commissioned an illustrator for the cover and all that. And there was a bit of a gap for about half a year. So I guess from start to finish, it took me about a year. Yeah.
It reminds me of that old John Lennon thing about life's what happens when you're making other plans.
Oh yeah. I can't agree more.
Yeah, life gets in the way.
Oh, it did. But,
and what's the next step then? Are you going to be publishing it digitally as well as traditionally?
Right. So everything's ready. Actually, the book actually has been printed, the review copies at least. So I have dozens of reviewers right now as we speak reading the review copies. We have someone at the Korea Herald and the Korea Times. They're reading the books right now, and they'll be writing reviews shortly after the book's release. So really looking forward to that.
Well, they're in for a real treat because I read the book. I've read it twice. I read it in the last few days, and I really enjoyed it. It's a short collection. They are short stories, we should say, but yeah, they pack a real punch.
Oh, thank you.
And Ron, what about your plans? You were talking about writing for the Korea Times or the Herald?
Times, yeah. I have a column that runs approximately once every month on the foreign community page where it's about, let's say anarchaeology, which is in my bio there. The column name is Cityscapes, if that helps you Google it. And the stories are basically all about my experiences urban exploring in Korea. The last one was about the Samil apartments that I mentioned. And the next one is going to come out on Wednesday, which is April Fool's Day. So I wanted to write about April Fool's Day jokes I've made involving this city. Like in 2013, I managed to get on a popular website a story about how since the administrative capital was moving to Sejong City, Seoul basically, somewhere in the name it means capital city. So they decided to rename the city, and they were going to call Seoul Gangnam, and that did very well back then.
Wow.
Interesting, yeah.
What if that's still
I completely forgot that Sejong City was a thing, yeah. I've been gone too long. Yeah. I remember, now I'm getting flashbacks about all there was a lot of talk about should this happen or not happen, or okay, I'm getting a little Korean flashback there. That was a moment. Where can we find you, Sollee, the project, and social media?
Oh yeah. I guess I'll be sending you more information later. But we have a Facebook group. We also have a Twitter. And also I am working on, I am actually making a website right now for the book. And when the book is released, there will be an Amazon page, of course. So yeah, I'll send you that information in text later on.
Great. I'll add it to the show notes and we can let everyone know where they can get hold of it.
So the books will be available at independent bookstores, but also I am looking into getting the books in those main bookstores that you just talked about. But they usually require the publisher to have a whole warehouse and thousands of copies available. So I
Yeah.
am not sure, but I have to talk to them right now.
So that's a work in progress.
Mm-mm.
And what about yourself, Sollee? Do you have any of your own that you're working on?
I have been working on this novel for the past 4 years, so yeah, it's definitely my passion project. But yeah, yes, hopefully it's the manuscript has been done for a while, and I'm sort of rewriting that, and yeah, hopefully it'll be published too, but I'm not sure.
Okay, I guess time will tell.
Yeah.
How about we move to our top 5? Ron,
Yep,
did you get the memo, the top 5 memo?
I did. Yes.
We changed a couple of them. I hope that was okay for you.
The first copies that I got made the most sense, to be honest. I'll see what I can do on the fly if anything is too different.
Yeah, that'll work. Maybe we could talk about, where shall we start? Let's start with a literary theme then. So we talked about, instead of a musical artist we should be listening to, who should we be reading? Solely.
I don't really have a good answer. So I was thinking about that question, and I ended up coming up with Stephen King, just because I recently came across one of his short stories called Night Surf, and it's about a world where most of the population has been wiped out because of a flu. So I was reading this book on a subway just a few weeks ago, and I was like, oh my God, this is prophetic. This is coronavirus. It's happening right now. And it kind of made me realize that a lot of sci-fi or horror or genre writers, actually, there are examples where they predicted the future. Maybe just because their stories are so imaginative. So yeah, I guess my answer is Stephen King.
Yeah, he's also really active on Twitter, Stephen King. He gives lots of forthright opinions, shall we say.
Oh, I'm
He's
not
definitely worth
following.
a follow. And Ron?
I don't do a great deal of fiction reading myself. Most of my reading is nonfiction. Like, some of the people that I would particularly want to read are Robert Neff, who writes also for the Korea Times. He has a column called Joseon Images, where he looks at Korea through the writing of foreigners who were here like in the 1890s and 1900s. So you can really learn a lot from that era. There's things like that is kind of what I read.
Interesting stuff. How about if we swiftly change tact? What's your go-to Noribang or karaoke song?
It's Let It Go for me. You know that Disney song? I love that song. And everybody has that love-hate relationship with the song. So when I put it on, everyone kind of grumbles. They're like, oh my God, not this again. And then they all sing along in the end. So I love Let It Go.
Well, I've been talking to a lot of people recently who have young families, and they're now having to homeschool them. And I think these Disney movies like Frozen they're on constant repeat. So yeah, you're not alone. And Ron?
I hate singing, so when I first started having to go to these places, I would just sing songs where I could imitate somebody's voice. And it started with Louis Armstrong. I can sing in Louis Armstrong style better than I can in normal styles. But since then, I've filtered through and I've found Han Dae-soo. And I really like singing Mul Jom Juso, which is one of his popular songs. But it's really not a very fun Norebang song. So usually it kind of seems to irritate other people.
So it's job done then, yeah? Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Nice. Maybe if we talk about a desert island question, what books would you take with you? I think I mentioned maybe you could take 3.
I guess I'll go first again.
Please.
I think the first book has to be Lolita by Nabokov. It's my favorite book of all time. It's so beautifully written, and I can read that book over and over again and finding something new to appreciate. And just because he has so many like references there that I don't understand. And I guess the second book, for the reason of the reason being I want to read it again and again, I think the second book would have to be the dictionary, because it's like you can read new parts again and again. I don't know, and learn new things. Like, I think the third book is my work in progress, the novel that I've been working on, if it counts, because I wanna finish it on the desert island.
Why not?
Yeah.
Hopefully
But
it
I'm
doesn't come to that. Hopefully you get it finished before that.
oh yeah, hopefully.
And Ron, what would your choices be, since your choice of reading is slightly different to Solly's?
Yeah, it would be very non-fictional when I put it together. One of them would be called Brief Encounters, Early Reports of Korea by Westerners. I have it. I've finished about a third of it. It's about historical accounts of foreigners like discovering Korea, like encountering Korea, being shipwrecked on Korea, starting, at the beginning of the history of that. It was compiled by Brother Anthony and Robert Neff, who I already name dropped. Also, the book Access All Areas, which is a guidebook to urban exploring by a guy who went by the pseudonym Ninjalicious. And last would be The Design of Everyday Things by Donald Norman, which is a look at kind of the usability of objects in society.
Well, we're getting quite an eclectic mix
I ever
there.
had in university. I learned something.
Fantastic. Yeah, something for everyone then, eh? Who would you most like to collaborate with and why? I'm guessing I'm speaking from a writing perspective.
I don't know if I'm allowed to like avoid questions, but I don't really have a particular novelist in mind. But I do have the kind of collaboration project I want to try. And like, I want to say, if this interests anyone, please contact me. So there is this Japanese romance novel called Between Calm and Passion that was written by a male and a female writer, who each wrote from the perspective of the protagonist of the corresponding gender. So the writing process goes something like one person writes a chapter, sends it to the other person, the person would read it, and then, write her own chapter based on the chapter that she received. And I remember the authors described the whole process as something like exchanging love letters. So I don't know, I always wanted to try something like that. So if anybody's interested.
That sounds like fun. Maybe not for me personally, but I'm not offering. No, but it sounds like something I would read. It's quite interesting because you get these two completely different points of views, and if you put it in the context of love letters to one another, then of course it takes on a completely different meaning. And where does it go from there? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, if I were to collaborate with somebody, which I've tried in the past and it doesn't really work because you end up having to wait for them. I would want to pick somebody who is eager but not a very experienced or skilled writer, so that I could push them around. So, I don't know if that person. There's not a specific person for that, but that would be what it would take.
The ideal piece as a partner.
Writing with someone else can be, I think a lot of people know this style of writing maybe from, comedy shows or film scripts, this kind of idea where people can bounce ideas off each other in a very different kind of way. But when you put it into the context of a collection of short stories, for example, or a novel, or something longer, then it takes on a completely different meaning, I think. Yeah. And of course, it's all about time, as one of you just mentioned there. It's trying to work with the other person and keeping to a schedule or keeping to keep it going. Yeah, it's quite a difficult thing to do, I imagine.
Yeah. And I wonder if this is true for other kinds of artists as well, like musicians and painters. But I find writers to have, including myself, one of the biggest egos I've ever encountered. So I think collaborating can be especially difficult for writers.
I'm sure there's a joke in there about how many writers' egos can you fit in a room, right? I'll have to work out the punchline for the next podcast. But Ron, what do you think of that? What Solly's just mentioned?
I think maybe I haven't met enough writers. I mean, it's a pretty solitary thing. You do it, in private, and then people aren't with you when they're experiencing it. So I've always found musicians to be much more arrogant, and I assume, well, maybe whatever word you used, artists, I think are usually kind of the most eccentric. So I can't really speak for writers. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely some egos in music. Let's put it that way. From my background, there's one or two. You can take this in a good way, or you can take it as a negative. But yeah, for better or for worse, I guess. On the other hand, where would they be without the ego? You need someone to front the band, for example, or you need this.
Yeah,
You
I
need
think
this antidote.
artists do need big ego, because then that's the only way for us to believe that what we say has meaning, that what we present to the world is worthwhile for people to listen to and pay attention. Otherwise, we wouldn't be encouraged to make art.
Right on. I completely agree. Last question then. A guilty pleasure. A band or an artist you shouldn't like, but you do.
I don't know if people know this writer, but he's Sidney Sheldon. Does he ring a bell?
Oh
So
yeah, I've heard of Sydney Sheldon, yeah.
yeah, I used to love him when I was in my early teens. Like, I would read all of his books, and he was actually the writer that inspired me to want to become one. So later on, when I found out that he has such a bad reputation, I was so shocked. I was so sad. But I still love his stories and books. Yeah.
And Ron, I guess we can answer this musically, or
I'd prefer musically.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't listen to any K-pop at all, but I do love listening to North Korean pop music, which I probably shouldn't.
Is there a place that we can listen together?
You really can just go online and Google North Korean. No, Pochenbo Electronic or Ensemble. That's a place to start. I like the stuff from the Kim Jong-il era better than the Kim Jong-un era. So to sound like a bit of a snob for a second. But yeah, Pochenbo. That would be probably enough to get autocomplete to fill in the rest. And you can find somebody will put on like a 70-minute album on YouTube that you can listen to all the way through.
Wow. Is it like one of those performances where like girls wear hanbok and they hold hands across their chests and like they sing, in that particular
A little bit, but they don't have hanbok in North Korea. They call it josanot.
Oh, makes sense. Huh.
Yeah, and yeah, they do wear that. There's fairly large orchestras that are making like kind of somewhat modern popish music.
Wow.
I think what's the current one? Samji Orchestra. It's like all girls and they play the instruments themselves and stuff. So there's quite a lot of musicianship that goes into them. But of course, all the songs are praising their leadership.
What is the appeal? Is it? I'm sure it's different from other kinds of pop, but
it's kind of old-fashioned sounding and reminds me of trot music a little bit.
Which is making a comeback these days in Korea. Which Craig, I guess you don't know because
has it ever gone away though? I mean, trot is it's
good question. But
it's a bit like the river hand that runs through the city. It's omnipresent.
Oh yeah, when you bike these people, biking along the Han River, they blast the trot music everywhere. But yeah, it's even more popular these days.
Is there someone we should be listening to?
Different TV shows that have brought it back.
Yeah.
Well, they
like that music too.
Sorry, go on, Ron.
No, I'm mostly done, but I do want to add this anecdote since we mentioned trot. Around 2007, I used to be involved in a group of DJs in Hongdae, and we would put on like DJ nights at Club DGBD, which is still there, and we would have like reggae and soul and stuff like that. One time, as a joke, I booked my friend to join us, and he was going to bring his Pongjak collection. And the whole night was a disaster. Like, we didn't get that many people, like never more than 20. And at the very end my friend was going to go on to chase people away. But the people who were remaining by the end of the night, as soon as they heard that, they just started dancing like wild. And it was like the set of the entire night. That was a lot of fun.
It does make you want to dance. It's got that rhythm and that something.
That's it.
Yeah,
That's something, isn't it? You don't know what it is, but it's that something.
Yeah, maybe it's the Korean blood in me, but yeah.
Excellent. Just before we go, is there somewhere that we can reach both of you? Are you active on social media yourselves?
Yeah, I do have the account for a Twitter account for the group and the book. It's at Fiction Soul. And yeah, I'm also active on Facebook. Yes, under Sollee Bae.
I'll add those to the show notes, and people, they want to get in touch with you. They want to find more about the project. Of course, where can you buy the book? You know, they want copies of it.
Very
Yeah,
important.
multiple copies, of course. And Ron, where can we find you?
I would say if you're trying to find out about me, I don't really have any websites or anything. I guess I would direct people to my Korea Times column for now. Hopefully there'll be something like a website coming in the future if I come out with more writing.
Sollee, thanks for joining us. Ron, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, hopefully we can do it again sometime. Thanks very much.
Thank
Yep.
you. Have a good day.
Thanks for having us.
We made it to the end of another episode of Can't Find My Way Home. A big thank you to Sollee and Ron for taking the time for our interview. I really enjoyed the collection of short stories, and as the book sleeve says, at the end of the book, you will understand what makes Seoul one of the most interesting and complex landscapes for literature. For anyone interested in South Korea, it's a great insight. A City of Han is released on April 16th and published by FWS Publishing. It will be available on Amazon and select bookstores across South Korea. Check out fictionwritersinseoul.com or Fiction Writers in Seoul on Facebook for more details. Where can you find out more about Can't Find My Way Home? You can find us on Facebook at Expat Music Pod. You can also search for Can't Find My Way Home. You can find us on Instagram at can't.findmywayhome. You can also find us on Google Podcasts and Spotify, as well as links on our YouTube page. Finally, you can find us on anchor.fm. You can search for us, look for Can't Find My Way Home, all one word. From there, all sorts of links to take you to all sorts of places, all sorts of platforms where you can listen to more episodes. Don't forget to like, share, comment. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please get in touch with me. You can get me on any of those aforementioned platforms. It won't be long till the next episode. I'm looking forward to getting right into it during this lockdown. Let's see how much productivity we can get done. Stay safe out there, everyone. Take care. Call someone you love, and I will see you on the next one. Cheers.